This video is about tourism, which is from Unit 2 of the AQA Geography A GCSE. Tourism is one of the world's largest industries, and it was worth 500 billion in 2007, and this is increasing every year, so it's being worth more and more each year, which is pretty good. And 75% of international travel is for holidays, so people going to enjoy themselves, whereas the other 25% is for boring people who want to do work abroad. And most countries have domestic tourism, which is tourism within the country itself. That's 4 to 5 times greater than international tourism, so tourism worldwide. Tourism is really good because it provides jobs and income, and it's one of the top 5 sources of foreign exchange in 83% of countries. And a nice interesting fact is that Caribbean countries get half of their GDP from tourism. GDP is gross domestic product, and it's the total value of goods and services produced in a country in a year. And the total value of this output becomes incomes for those who produce it in the forms of wages, profits, interests and rent. So why has tourism grown recently? Firstly, there's social and economic factors, because people are getting wealthier, they've got more disposable income, so more income they can spend on stuff they actually want. Families are getting smaller, but with 2 working parents, so they've got a much greater family income, so they've got more to spend, so they spend it on holidays. And also, workers are getting more time off work due to laws. I don't know what the law is, but typically get 4 to 6 weeks holiday a year. I don't think that's true, but that's what it says there. And car ownership's increased as well. So everyone, well not everyone, but loads of people have got cars, so you can just drive and go on holiday for a day whenever you want. And that's domestic tourism increased massively due to that. And people are often living longer, which is pretty good for them because they get a nice longer life, and it's also good for everyone else because they're going to go travel in their spare time, which increases tourism, leading to increased employment and that sort of thing. So the improvements in technology have also led to the growth of tourism because travel's got much faster and much easier. So you can get from place to place much quicker, so people don't mind spending an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours on the plane to get to where they want to go on holiday. So they're like, oh, we don't mind. Whereas in the past, if you had to get a boat, it took 3 weeks to get to where you wanted to go. By the time you got there, it'd be time to come back, and that'd just be pointless. The expansion of the internet has also led to more tourism because there's more chance of online booking. So people can just book their holidays online, and go, rather than having to go to one of those shops that you can go to and book their holiday. Because that's just depressing time, effort, money. People can't be bothered, so they stick on holiday. And there's also cheaper flights around the world to make holidays abroad more common, and this means that everyone can go on holiday because everyone can afford these cheap flights. Well, not everyone, but more people than in the past when you had to pay loads to go on a ship. There's also been a massive expansion of holiday choice, and there's a greater variety of holidays available, so it suits loads of people. So if you're one of those weirdos that likes extreme holidays, you can go on an extreme holiday. If you're an eco freak, you can go on an eco tourism holiday. And if you're just a family, you can go on a cheap package holiday. So it suits everyone. Pull features attract tourists to particular destinations, and there's 2 main pull features, which are culture and landscape. Culture, stuff like museums, art galleries, architecture, shops and restaurants. And landscapes, the stuff that's there naturally, like mountains, coasts and countryside. So areas that are rich in either of these 2 are often more popular for tourists. An example of that is Italy, which has got its nice landscapes, so Venice, Florence, and the Alps. I don't know if it's pronounced Florence, but it doesn't really matter. And then it's got all its historical stuff like the Colosseum and the Roman baths and that sort of thing. So you get loads of tourists going there. Very strong pull. Tourism isn't as important for richer countries as poorer countries because richer countries such as Western Europe and North America tend to have a more balanced economy, of which tourism is only one part, and they get money in from all different sections. So tourism has a smaller impact on GDP in rich countries than less developed countries, who rely on tourism heavily for foreign exchange, employment and better living standards. So these poorer countries tend to take advantage of the growing tourist industry more than the rich countries, although the rich countries are known to exploit the poorer countries. So this is a case study of Dubai. I couldn't actually find a description of this case study anywhere in the specification, but it was in the textbook, so I thought I'd put it in anyway. And Dubai is a tiny state on the Arabian Gulf coast, accessible quite accessible because there's 120 airlines which fly there from all over the world. Tourism's grown really rapidly over the past few years, growing from 2.8 million tourists in 2000 to 10 million tourists in 2010, which is a lot of tourists. Hotels have increased loads, there's many more of them, with 2 to 3% annual increase in hotel bed nights and a massive 22% increase in profits annually, which is pretty awesome for them. So why are people attracted to Dubai? Because it's got duty-free shopping malls, huge department stores, sightseeing, Dow building yards, not quite sure what they are, zoos, water sports, out-of-city excursions to the desert, and birdwatching trips for birdwatching freaks. I didn't mean to offend any birdwatchers then, sorry. So what are the benefits of tourism in poorer countries? One of the main ones is employment. There's direct employment, which is people who are employed to serve tourists, for example, working in hotels or as waiters in restaurants. And then there's the indirect employment, which is because the hotels and the restaurants are buying food, they're buying it from local suppliers to feed tourists. So these local suppliers have to supply more, so they employ more people. Tourism also brings foreign exchange to poorer countries, which is really important. Foreign exchange is when sort of foreign money comes into the country, so we've got our pounds, our dollars and our euros, which are really important for the poorer countries who can use this money to buy goods from these rich developing countries, and I guess in the case of euros, continents almost. Then there's also tax revenue. Because the visitors are paying for the services they use, these services get more and more developed, which improves the local quality of life because the locals are benefiting from these improvements that are made for the tourists, but they benefit everyone. And there's also businesses which can grow due to tourism, because there's many small businesses started to serve tourists. For example, taxis, bars, builders, I don't know, that sort of thing. So now we've got a bit of UK tourism history, which is very boring. UK tourism used to be all domestic, so everyone was just travelling within the country, with only a few rich, privileged snobs being able to afford international travel, so a few people could go abroad, but only the top of the top, or whatever you want to call them. Domestic tourism was really good because it could be cheap and it could be quite expensive, so you could have cheap stuff like camping or, I don't know, sleeping rough or whatever, or you could have expensive holidays like staying in posh hotels. Then you could have sort of the medium ones like bed and breakfast. It's quite good. But then domestic tourism grew and grew and grew in the 1950s and 60s because the UK economy provided better pay and more time off work, so people had more money and more time and what better to do with it than go on holiday, so annual holidays became more and more common. UK seaside resorts became really popular in the 1970s with 40 million visitors annually. Unfortunately, this declined because package holidays became the thing to do. They were cheaper and had more reliable weather. What was not to like? The bad food. Here's a list of some really boring figures about tourism and the UK economy. So the UK economy currently gets £80 billion from tourism and leisure. This is increasing each year, hopefully. If it doesn't, we're in a bit of trouble. And we're also getting 27.7 million annual overseas visitors who spend £13 billion. That's a lot of money. Restaurants are getting £20 billion in profits annually. Hotels, not so good, just 16 billion. And the most popular paying destination is the London Eye, which I've always thought would be really boring to go on, but I've got a really closed mindset, so that's probably why. And it has 3.7 million visitors annually. And it's really expensive. So now we move on to the Butler tourist resort life cycle, which is like really important, and people who have tourist resorts love it. It's got 6 stages, technically 6, but the last ones, could be 7 or 6 depending on how you look at it. Exploration, involvement, development, consolidation, stagnation, and then decline or rejuvenation. So there's 5 set stages and then 2 which you can choose from. Well, you might not be able to choose, but you hope you can. So exploration is when there's a small number of visitors who are attracted by something particular, like they might all go to the coast because there's a nice seawall there. They probably wouldn't because seawalls are very unattractive, but they might. Local people haven't really developed tourist services, they're not really taking advantage of these visitors. But then, in the involvement stage, the local population's like, oh, why have we never noticed all these visitors before? And they start to provide services for them, maybe an ice cream stand or two, something like that, a few restaurants. And it just grows and grows until you reach the development stage when all these large companies sort of come in and they build hotels, leisure complexes, package holidays, and the number of tourists and job opportunities for locals just rise and rise and rise, gets better and better and better. Living the life. Consolidation is when tourism is a major part of the local economy with a steady number of visitors, but unfortunately, some hotels becoming a bit, unattractive. Type of visitors goes down market, so you get your day trippers, hen parties, stag do's, that sort of thing. Bit depressing for the locals who thought they had it all. They don't anymore, ha ha ha. Stagnation is when the resort becomes really unfashionable and tourism decreases, businesses fail. It's just even more depressing. And then there's a choice of two things. We can have decline or rejuvenation. So decline is when literally the resort declines because visitors prefer other resorts, so day trippers are the main source of income. Then there's rejuvenation, which is when the locals and the businesses try to modernise the resort and get different tourists and try to get it better, but that usually fails. Ha ha ha. Now we have another case study. Blackpool, which is a sort of, don't know what it is, but it's on the Lancashire coast in northwest England. And, in the 19th century it was a major tourist centre for factory workers who could just get the train down, have a nice day there, get the train back. And then in the 1900s and 1950s it had a massive boom because tourists took trains from all over the country, so it wasn't just the local factory workers. Unfortunately, Blackpool kind of failed, couldn't compete with package holidays, which sort of grew in popularity after that. And Blackpool ended up relying on day trippers and stag and hen parties, which isn't really what you want to be doing. So then Blackpool was like, what can we do to try to get back? Rejuvenate. And they applied to be the home of the UK's first super casino, spending millions in the Blackpool master plan to improve the town image by upgrading hotels, building indoor leisure centres, increasing parking to try to get this bid. Unfortunately, they came third to Manchester and lost out on the potential of £2 billion of investment, so it really sucks to be them. They also lost out on the 20,000 jobs which would have been created. But if you think about it, the Manchester casino kind of failed, so maybe it wasn't such a bad thing. And now we have the Blackpool Tower, Tower Ballroom, Blackpool Light Show, Sea Life Centre, and these all attract loads of tourists. And tourism is declining a bit, but more slowly, so it's not all bad. So what are the external factors that affect UK tourism? Terrorism is a really serious external factor that affects tourism because after a terrorist attack, people are less willing to take flights, go on holidays, because they don't want there to be another one, because they're thinking it's all dangerous at the moment. So after 9/11 there was loads of extra security and check-in times increased massively, and everyone was like, we can't bother to do that anymore, so tourism decreased. And after the 7/7 2005 underground bombings, people were unwilling to go to London. They were a bit worried that it was going to happen again, so they didn't go. So we lost out on loads of potential revenue. Exchange rates are also really important at affecting UK tourism, because the currency exchange rate controls the value of money for tourists on holiday, and tourists are attracted to countries with a weak exchange rate. So say, I think a few years ago, America and us, but the exchange rate was $2 to a pound. So when we went to America, everything seemed really cheap to us, so it was a really good time to go to America. But if Americans came over here, everything seemed horribly expensive. So they were put off going on holiday here, but we were like, we're going to go to America. And then the banking crisis has a really serious impact on tourism, because the recession in 2008 meant that people had less disposable income, so it reduced the number of holidays taken. But it might have increased domestic holidaying a bit, because people couldn't afford holidaying abroad, but they didn't want to cut out on holidays altogether, so they might have gone on holiday to local areas and stuff like that. National parks are large areas of mainly rural land regarded as unusual and worth protecting, and they're usually designated by law, where development's limited and planning is very controlled. England's got quite a few national parks, and they cover 7% of its land area, whereas Scotland only has 2 national parks which cover 7.3% of its land area, whereas Wales has 3 national parks which cover 20% of its land area, so Wales win by miles. Worldwide, 12% of land area is protected by over 6,500 national parks. I think it was 6,555 a few years ago, but it increases over time. The UK's first national park was actually the Peak District, which was created in 1951 by an Act of Parliament after the war, because everyone was trying to improve the quality of life, so the government was like, oh, let's create national parks so people can sort of relax in there, have fun, do some games. And the aim of national parks is really to conserve natural and cultural landscapes whilst allowing visitor access and enjoyment. We've got a really great variety of national parks. We've got our upland national parks like Snowdonia. There's a few lowland national parks like the Norfolk Broads, and a few coastal national parks like Pembrokeshire. I don't know how you pronounce that, but that one. 81% of national park land is privately owned by farmers mainly. And then we've got the National Trust, Forestry Commission, Ministry of Defence and some water authorities which own the areas. But the national park authorities themselves only directly control 1% of land, so they might put a few rules out for how the other bits of land should be controlled, but they can't directly control it, they only directly control 1%. And locals benefit greatly from increased tourism because it provides more jobs. The locals can get food for the tourists, set up their own businesses and stuff like that. So everyone benefits from national parks, because national parks lead to more tourism, because they're prettier, supposedly. And we have yet another horribly boring case study, this time about the Lake District. Boo! The Lake District's in Cumbria in northwest England. It's a glaciated upland area, which is 64 kilometres north-south and 53 kilometres east-to-west, so it is pretty big. It became a national park in 1951, and it's famous for its scenery, wildlife and cultural heritage. So why do people actually go to the Lake District? Well, mainly the lakes, obviously, the walks, and the historical sort of stuff that's there. The lakes in the Lake District are really nice, particularly the Ribbon Lakes and Tarns, which is stunning and great for recreation, such as Lake Windermere, I don't know how you pronounce it, which specialises in ferry cruises, and it's got specific areas on different lakes for small boats, wind sailing, powerboating and fishing, so there is something there to suit everyone. Then we have the walks. Everyone goes to the Lake District for a wee walk, and there's walks there for everybody. Like, there's some flatter ones, so even people in wheelchairs can enjoy these walks. It's not really a walk, but it's a ride through the countryside. There's steeper ones, winding ones, so that people that are more adventurous can go up there. There's climbing, there's access to the fells. I'm not sure what fells are, but apparently there's unlimited access to them. And there's also guides that have been published, so many different guides, so that different people have a different guide to suit them, and tourists can find their way around the area, and the people that write the guides and sell them make some more money. And then we've got our historical sort of stuff, because there's evidence of early settlements, which is fascinating for tourists. I'm completely baffled why you'd be fascinated by these. Apparently there's dry stone walls. How exciting. Not why I'd go anywhere. But also there's famous artists like John Ruskin who enjoyed the area, so he painted loads of stuff from the area, so if you're a John Ruskin fan you could go there and be like, oh, I recognise that from that painting, and you look like a bit of a freak. And then some writers like Beatrix Potter loved the area. I think Beatrix Potter actually lived in the area, which is pretty cool for her. Unfortunately, tourism's actually had a bit of a negative impact on the Lake District, with the traffic problems, honeypot sites, pressure on properties and environmental issues. So the majority of traffic problems are congestion, because there's so many people all coming into the Lake District, mainly day trippers. So they're all coming in, there's not very many roads that go into the Lake District, well there weren't back then. You'll see soon that there are more. So there's massive traffic jams, particularly because the roads are narrow and quite winding, so you can't go very fast. And there's also not enough parking spaces, so the visitors were like, oh, where should we park? And they parked on grassy verges, which is very bad. It causes damage. Serious. Then there's honeypot sites, which are sites that attract large numbers of tourists, which places pressure on the environment and people. And the Lake District is a physical and cultural honeypot site due to its beauty spots, with one big honeypot site called Cat Bells. It's a pretty stupid name, I know, but they love it there. Apparently it's got an easy climb. And there's also been lots of footpath erosion because there's 4 million tourists who walk, I think, 6 kilometres there each year. So when they're all walking, they're moving their feet, and this is causing footpath erosion, which is really sad, serious, really bad. And then there is pressure on property. Because 20% of the property in the Lake District is actually a second home or holiday let, so its owners aren't actually full-time there. So A, they're not part of the community, and B, because there's so much demand for these pretty little houses, the local kids that have grown up there and want to live there can't afford the houses because the demand's made them more expensive, so they have to move out, which is pretty depressing for them because, you know, they're moving away from their livelihood, their families, their homes, their hopes and their dreams. And then there's the environmental issues, because on certain lakes like Lake Windermere there's many faster water sports vehicles. Well, there used to be, there's a speed limit now, but there was faster water sports vehicles which created wash and that eroded the shore, which is pretty sad. And also these vehicles were at a risk of like spilling their fuel, so that led to pollution. Very serious indeed. So what have the authorities done to try to control these problems? They've actually, in 1997, the year I was born, bit of trivia for you, so stalkers can find me, and in my age, the Lake District National Park Management Plan was put into place, which catered for tourists, whilst looking after the interests of the residents. Very nice for them. So the traffic solution was to build more roads, which were country strategic, so more roads were going into and out of the Lake District, so tourists can get in and out easier, so there's less congestion on the main roads going in. And there's also the traffic's being split by the shorter, more faster, convenient roads, and then some longer, pretty scenic roads, which lorries aren't actually allowed on to reduce, you know, noise and stuff in those areas, and that splits the traffic, so there's less congestion on the mini roads. And then in the sort of towns in the Lake District, do you have towns in the Lake District? I don't know, I've never been there, but they've got bus lanes apparently, and buses are used instead of cars, which reduces the number of vehicles on the road, which is better because A, less pollution, and B, less traffic. But unfortunately, because there's quite a few narrow, windy roads in the Lake District, this isn't, you know, quite as convenient as it sounds. Then there's honeypot management, so mainly the paths have been repaired and reinforced, so less weathering takes place on them. And there's also signposts on them, like keep on the path and stuff like that, which sounds really horrible and cruel, but it's good for the environment. Roadsides have been fenced off, so cars can't drive onto the verges anymore, and we've sort of built some hidden car parks. We've tried to surround them by trees so it doesn't look like we've done anything, but we've actually built car parks there, so then there's more spaces for cars to park so they don't park on the verges. And we also have designated picnic areas with regular bins along the routes and signposts saying do not litter, which reduces the problem of litter. And litter's really bad because like a cow might eat your piece of litter and choke and die, and it'll be your fault. Then we have property price strategies. Unfortunately, these haven't been very successful because management strategies can't really control house prices, and so little's been achieved. Although, you know, local authorities could build more homes for rent and developers could erect more low-cost homes for sale, but they haven't. Sucks to be you. And then we have the environmental solutions. So we've now got a speed limit of 18 kilometres per hour on Lake Windermere, which reduces the wash and limits erosion. So that's really good because erosion's really bad, as you probably learnt in Unit 1 of Geography, if you did that unit on water. I did, unfortunately. And the most damaging spots have also been limited to certain areas, so it restricts the spread of damage. So you might get quite a bit of damage in one area, but it's better to have it all in one area than spread out over all these different areas, because that's really expensive to repair. But it's not all negative. Tourism has brought so many opportunities to the Lake District. Farmers have benefited greatly because they can provide bed and breakfast accommodation, get a bit of extra cash in, little wonga, and farmers can also convert their farm buildings to holiday cottages and their fields to camping sites to get more tourists in. But I don't know why you do that if you're a farmer. I mean, unless you had all this excess land. I mean, you don't want people camping on your field because knowing them they'll set fire to it and you'll lose all your crops. Very depressing. And farms can also provide touristic activities. Oh yes, I made up that word, so I hope it's true, I hope it's a real word. Such as pony trekking, so get all these fat overweight people to ride your horses, probably killing them. And paintballing. I really want to go paintballing. Apparently it really hurts though. And then tourism also provides employment in the Lake District, because tourism is amazing because it provides jobs directly, like people in hotels and stuff, and indirectly food suppliers to the hotels, particularly in the service sector, or tertiary sector, as posh people like to call it. and businesses thrive due to the increased demand for tourism. Because say you had a business selling postcards, and there was like no tourism, you might not sell very many postcards, but then suddenly all these tourists came and they all wanted to buy postcards, and then you'd make a lot of money. I've never really seen the point in postcards. I always end up writing them anyway though. It's a waste of money. But there's negative employment. There could be seasonal unemployment because tourism's more in summer than winter. So in the winter you've got all these people that don't have a job anymore because they're not needed. So pretty depressing for them. So moving on to mass tourism now, which is pretty good because I was getting really fed up of learning about the Lake District. Mass tourism is tourism on a large scale, shock horror, to one country or region, which equates to the development and consolidation phases of the Butler model, which we did earlier. There's many advantages and disadvantages of this. The main advantage, obviously, as always of tourism, is the employment. There's mass employment due to mass tourism. And also farmers with excess land can sell it at high prices to tourism firms for developments. Unfortunately, these farmers are often exploited and they sell their land and they don't get very much for it. But, thinking about the positives, they can sell their land and get some money. But not as much as they could do. They think it's a high price. It's not a high price, it's a rubbish price, but they didn't know that. Ha ha ha. Infrastructure that's put into place for the tourists also benefits the locals. So say the council, builds some new roads, the locals get to use new roads as well. New public toilets. The locals, if they don't have toilets in their homes, can use these new public toilets. It's the life. Leisure facilities that are open for tourists may be open to local people, so they may put a big swimming pool there so tourists can go for a swim. And the local people are like, yeah, let's go for a swim too. And that's really good because it improves their health and fitness, very important there. And the increased demand from tourists leads to a positive multiplier effect because as the tourists come in, they're demanding stuff, so they spend more. And because they're demanding more, supply needs to increase too, so employment increases. And then because employment's increased, there's more people that have got more money, so then they demand more, so supply has to increase, and then more people need to be employed, and it's really happy for everyone in the village, yay! Until the tourism goes away, and then there's a horrible negative multiplier effect, a downward spiral of doom. And there's also some disadvantages of mass tourism. Predictable. There's obviously seasonal unemployment, because tourists tend to visit less in winter. And smaller firms might go out of business by large firms and travel companies because they tend to move in seeing the opportunity to boost profits, and then smaller firms just can't compete. Very depressing. And local employees are often very poorly paid, so they can't actually afford to use new facilities. So it's like rubbing it in their face, like, we've got this amazing new swimming pool here, but you're poor, you can't use it. Ha ha ha. It's just horrible. And investing companies are often based abroad in more developed countries, so all the major profits leave the host country. So they've got some jobs and stuff, but there's not much economic growth because they've not got enough money. So, it's pretty sad. But it's life. They'll live. And now we have another case study, which is Jamaica. And I really want to play some Jamaican music here, but I haven't got any, so I'm not going to. Jamaica is a Caribbean island which is really popular due to water sports, wildlife sanctuaries, and guess what? Golf. So you're going to travel halfway around the world to play golf? I don't think so. But apparently they do. So, I'll leave it like that. They get 1.3 million tourists a year who spend an average of $931. And 8% of the population is employed in tourism, which is a lot of people. And tourism contributes to 20% of GDP. Wow! That was a very sarcastic wow there. And 1.3 billion of foreign exchange. $1 billion, of foreign exchange. Which is, again, a lot. Jamaica is all about community tourism, where the visitors become part of the village during their stay, so they might actually stay with the locals. I mean, I wouldn't like that personally, have some random person staying in the house. They'd probably be a murder person, honestly. If someone stayed in my house, they would kill me. And locals, who provide services like restaurants and shops for tourists, they benefit because they get jobs and stuff. And Jamaica's actually quite a big supporter of ecotourism, which is offered by companies who build eco-lodges. And they do this to spread tourists around the island from the Blue Mountains to the coast, which keeps tourist densities low and takes pressure off the environment, which is really important because we won't want to put too much pressure on the environment. That'd be really bad. We're now moving on to extreme environments. which are locations with particularly difficult environments where the development of tourism has only recently occurred due to a niche market demand for somewhere different with elements of risk and physical challenges, such as a difficult climate. And tourists can do a range of exciting activities, such as rock climbing, hope you don't fall and die, paragliding, wee crash, climbing waterfalls, splish splash splosh, travelling through Schnobble, which sounds a bit dangerous, and ice walking, which might crack and then you might die. Another name for this type of tourism is shock tourism and adventure tourism, and it's generally targeted at wealthy, unmarried, childless, unmarried. I think I said unmarried twice there, but it's all about being single these days. 30-year-olds who travel in small groups over great distances. But luckily there's enough people in this category to allow the tourism sector to grow. So, say there was only 5 people that were wealthy, unmarried, childless, and 30 and wanted to go ice walking, whatever it's called, then you wouldn't really be able to develop sector. But because there's loads of these people that want to go ice walking, the industry can grow and get better and hopefully offer more exciting holidays in the future. Yeah. And luckily little investment is needed to set up these extreme trips, because part of the experience is living rough, fun, and so no hotels or roads need to be built because people can just sleep under the stars. How romantic, until you get eaten by a polar bear. And we have another case study. Blah. Antarctica. Small-scale tourism to Antarctica began in the 1950s, and it grew massively since then. So there was 9,000 tourists in 1992 to 46,000 tourists in 2007. This figure is actually decreasing slightly due to the so many laws on the boats. This number's decreased. But there's still over 100 tourist companies involved in these trips to Antarctica. The tourists themselves, they fly from the Northern Hemisphere to New Zealand or Argentina, might have a few days there, and then they take a cruise ship to Antarctica, and then get into smaller boats to actually go ashore, like Hogwarts. They got into those small boats, they went to Hogwarts. That was fun. That was really random and inappropriate. It wasn't really inappropriate, it just wasn't appropriate. So that makes it inappropriate. Anyway, the sites where they land are chosen for specific features, and they quickly become honeypot sites because there's not very much on Antarctica. 99% of it is ice. So when you find something that isn't ice, this is really exciting. So everyone goes there, and then it gets melted down to water. Activities you can do in Antarctica are kayaking, skiing, climbing, scuba diving, and helicoptering. Fun. The impact on Antarctica is quite uneven because little of Antarctica is visited, but in some places, unfortunately, it is too great. And those cute penguins, they have their kids and they have their eggs, but if you touch the eggs of the kids, they're like, ooh, that's strange, bad, and then they go away and they abandon them and then they die. And it's all your fault if you were that person that touched that egg. You don't want to live with that guilt. There's also been horrible pollution accidents where, there's been horrible oil spills because ships have hit uncharted rocks or bits of ice, and yeah, it's bad. Luckily, Antarctica's made efforts to become more environmentally friendly, and now all tour operators are members of IAATO. I'm not actually sure what that stands for, but it directs tourism to be eco-friendly, which is really good and nice of it, so well done IAATO. And the scale of tourism is actually controlled under the terms of the Antarctic Treaty, which all of the ships and cruisers abide by. And there's also limits on the number of visitors, and the visitors can't visit sites of special scientific interest, or SSSIs, such as South Georgia. Activities. You've got to have a permit to do any activities in Antarctica. So you want to go skiing, have to have a permit. Want to go ice walking, have to have a permit. And no ship carrying over 500 passengers can enter Antarctica. So, sorry, 501, you're not allowed in, babe. And all tourists must be supervised by a trained guide to prevent them from disturbing the wildlife, because they might not know about this penguin. Because it's quite weird behaviour of the penguins to leave their young behind. So, say you were a tourist and you didn't know that, you might think, oh, egg, I'm going to touch it. Yeah, it would show you very stupid, but you might do that, and then it could lead to deaths. So these guides stop you from doing it. So moving on from the excitement that was extreme tourism, we're coming to sustainable tourism. Stewardship is the personal responsibility of looking after the environment and not damaging the present or future environment through careful planning and development of strategies. Conservationship is the careful and planned use of resources in order to manage and maintain the natural environment for future generations, for example, through the protection of habitats and landscapes. Ecotourism is tourism that focuses on protecting the environment and local way of life. Perfect for eco-freaks. Ecotourism caters for a small market of environmentally aware tourists, otherwise known as eco-warriors, which have enough money to afford the high costs of ecotourism and who want to experience the natural environment on holidays without damaging it. Ecotourism is more expensive because you've got to build eco-lodges and it's a smaller group, so one guide is for a small number of people, so a small number of people contributing towards paying for this one guide, which makes it more expensive. And ecotourism has very little impact on the environment because ecotourists stay in small eco-lodges with sustainable energy, like solar panels and stuff like that. They eat locally grown food from a sustainable source, which is also good, not only because it's sustainable, but it provides employment indirectly for the locals who are growing this food. They use locals as guides, that's directly creating employment, and they hold in very small groups to reduce noise pollution. Ecotourism increases employment in the areas in which it operates, as I've already said, for all the reasons I've already said. So we're going to do a case study now. You'll be glad to know that this is the last case study in the tourism section. Yay! And it's of the Galapagos Islands. Galapagos. Not really sure how you pronounce that, but yeah. There are 50 volcanic islands in the Pacific, 1,000 kilometres off the South American west coast. And they're all quite protected, with 90% of the islands designated as national parks or marine reserves. And this protection began in the 1930s when islands became the first UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1979. It's a pretty cool title to have, the first World Heritage Site. Oh yeah. Okay, tourists visit under very strict rules, arriving in small ships. Sorry, this is pretty random, but if there were strict rules, why would you just want to go somewhere? Why wouldn't you want to go somewhere where there were no rules? So much better. Anyway, the Galapagos Conservation Trust receives £25 from each visitor for conservation work, and this money comes out of the money they pay to go on holiday. I think the holidays cost £800, so the £25 comes out of that. So that's really good because they've got all this money, they can conserve the area and make it more eco-friendly. Unfortunately, there's a few problems with travelling to these areas. The big one is the oil from the boats, which pollutes the area, so that leads to horrible damage to marine life. And there's also pressure from tourists on the island's water supply, so the locals might not actually have enough water, and then they might die. Very bad. However, there are some benefits, yeah. The locals can get jobs in tourism that don't damage the environment, because if there weren't tourists there, they might have to do jobs like cutting down trees and selling the timber, which would be really bad for the environment and destroy the habitats of many animals that we need and love, like the sloth. And there's also the economic benefit because local businesses provide the needs of tourists, and this increases employment and economic growth and la la la. And the quality of life also improves because people have got increased incomes. Well, it's a materialistic quality of life. Your actual quality of life depends on those who love you and those you love, so that doesn't really change, but materialistically you're better off. And that is the end of the tourism unit of the AQA Geography A GCSE. So that's a whole third of the second exam learnt. Woohoo! Party, rock on, celebrations.